So I understand that the two of you were selected to be part of some type of group of esteemed screenwriters to go to a castle and write?
Yes. And not to self-deprecate, I don't know if it's esteemed, but we were super lucky. They picked the association's called Dreamago, and they run a workshop called Pen et Pellicule, which is pen and film in French. And they do kind of a writer's lab. So maybe in setup a little different, but a little bit the same as if you've heard of the Sundance Screenwriting Lab. So the way they organized it was that they brought in 5 or 6 professional consultants who have writers in their own right, or who have been executives who work with screenwriters professionally, and then they 10 teams of participants. There were two or three sets of teams.
There were 3 sets of teams.
Yes.
And we were one of them.
And we were one. And so you would read everybody's script from, who was going. And so you had a set of, you would meet with each of the professional consultants, and then you would also meet with all the other screenwriters individually and kind of exchange notes. So we ended up with 14 sets of notes.
Which I understand you wrote a blog post. Little bit of research.
Very good background research.
Yeah, Two-Headed Monster about notes, which I find interesting. How was that to receive notes as a group versus maybe the usual way of just individually?
Well, I
think there, for me, since this was my first time doing a workshop of this nature, I went back to school and got an advanced degree, and so we had I had done workshops with my work there, but this was a lot of, first of all, it was an international group of people. So there were people from Cuba and from Switzerland and from France, and we were the only U.S. script that was accepted into the program, which I'm actually quite proud of, and the only English language script that was chosen. So we had we had translators, and so there were moments where we would and Barrington studied very vigorously her Spanish. I have some Spanish background, but neither of us are fluent, and so it was kind of trying to make sure, did we understand the translation well? Did we understand the context in, so like my questions were always kind of, if there was a question about a note, then, I wanted to know specifically like where that came from, whether it be like a man that was talking to us from Cuba who had a different understanding of this particular cultural world than we did. And so, it was wonderful and exhausting, and lots of notes. And so like that, that's what we're really fishing through and kind of sorting out. Like, there are certain through lines, thankfully, that, when people were talking about deeper, more complex, or those kinds of things, that is easy to understand and ride. But then when someone says, oh, this scene should definitely not be there, and someone else says, that scene is the best scene in the whole film, and you're like, okay. So it's just about, for me at least, and I was talking to Barrington about this morning, one of the things that I had to do was like take into context all the notes and all the comments and all the everything, and then go back inside and go, what am I really trying to say here? And what fits with what we're trying to say, and what helps strengthen what we're trying to say? Because there is so much like, oh, that's a great idea, or I never thought about that, or dang, they want us to lose that whole thing? That was my favorite part. And so it really is about remembering what the story is you want to try to tell, or at least that's kind of how I'm going at it, and what makes sense to help propel that to a better place. And so, it was a manic week of screenings and writing and listening to criticism and eating, which, you know, we have no problem with. But it's intense. It's very, very intense. And so for me, you know, between the jet lag and all those other things that happen to one's body, just trying to be present, trying to understand, and trying to stay awake and, you know, really fully take things in, because, you know, sleep deprivation fits into all that stuff. But it was the most exciting thing, because in that, you know, in those moments and in those opportunities, you know, getting to sit at a bench that had a heartbeat, can't beat it for inspiration.
So there was a bench outside the castle. That was kind of like an art installation.
It's an art
or something.
installation.
And so, like, you'd if you sat on it, it would kind of start to
It pulsates.
I thought you meant it was a metaphor for
No,
something.
no,
It's an actual physical
It's an actual
thing.
physical heart beating or beating bench, and so that's kind of, and it was funny because that's where I sat when I was writing my notes about this character and her mother, who was deceased, being separated from my mother, who was in Los Angeles and I was in Switzerland.
Mother's Day.
On Mother's Day, and there's this pulsating
Wow.
around me and inside of me, and so it was, you know, and it was so funny because you know, and I've told this story before, you know, some of the consultants, I just connected with them, you know, like some of them I just genuinely connected with them as people. And, you know, one of the consultants, there was a really stressful one evening, and I was just like, you know, and Barrington was just like, oh, this is, you know, she lets it out in one way, and I'm just like, and to his credit, he took me out to the outside, and he's like, just scream your head off. He's like, because it will make you sick. He's like, you can't keep that stuff. So I find myself now, like when things really stress me out, to just find ways to let it go, even if I just go to the beach and just go.
There's a new movement that does that.
Really?
It's like primal screaming.
Yes.
It's
So,
like-
you know, so I got more out of that than just the writing. I think that was really important to me. You know, it feeds what I'm doing as a writer, but there was so much more. And even that same consultant and I were talking, he's like, could this be done in Los Angeles? And I was like, nope. You couldn't. I don't think you could do the same.
Oh, the lab.
That experience and get that, because we were in a small town. It was surrounded by vineyards. It's a very different kind of experience. Like, the town shut down on Sundays. I haven't met that since my, you know, young days in the South. Like, and now everything's open, and, you know, like where my mother's from, everything's open on Sunday. But that place shut down except for the cinema, and one grocery store was open till like 2 or 3, something like that. But it, you know, like everything just kind of got quiet, and some of the pubs and restaurants stayed open. But it was just kind of like surreal. It was like, this is Sunday.
Yeah.
And I haven't met that in a while. So that was just like, wow. So there were other experiences that went along with that to me were inspiring. And I think it did bring Barrington and I closer together, I think, because we had, even though we had traveled together before, this was the first time we'd been on a plane together and traveled for 14 hours together, and we were working together. We were living in the same space. Before we had gone to Austin for a film festival, but she came after I did. We were staying in separate venues, and so we would just kind of meet up, like, and then we dined together. You know, like we had to eat, you know, we would often eat together because sometimes we were the only English speakers at the table, and other people would be talking in their own language. So it was one of those things where, you know, like I learned a lot more about she and her husband and how they got together. Like, I've known her for 3 years. I didn't know how they, like that, how that story came about. And it had an impact on, when they gave notes, she was like, yeah, well, when my husband and I were together, this was how, and I was like, oh, we could do that. Yeah. So it was this really great sharing of ideas and time and personal space. Because like I've said, I live alone. So, like I was with Barrington for a whole week and, she's like, do I snore? And, and bathrooms, women in bathroom space, so those things really did kind of enhance the partnership in my estimation, even including the writing.
Yeah, so you'd asked about just the note getting process
and
I'm getting notes as a team.
I went all on that tangent. You cut that off.
That's good.
But
and I have a follow-up too after.
Okay.
Oh, okay, yeah.
Sorry.
But yeah, so I guess two things. Janice talked about it a little bit. One is there's the actual moment of getting the notes and how you respond to notes, and she's somebody who definitely likes to kind of follow up and ask questions and investigate. She's a journalist. and I kind of come from this writers in writing parlance, they're like, you're in the booth and you don't really get to respond. You don't respond to notes when, for a certain point. So there's a theory of getting notes that when somebody's giving you notes, that you kind of try to stay very neutral, because any reactions that you give to them is then going to provoke them to change the kind of response that they're giving to you, because we have this humanity where we don't want to hurt people's feelings and we want people to like us and things like that. So I'm kind of like, okay, so my natural, I don't know if it's natural, but my over the years kind of bonsai together shape of things is that I'm like, okay, maybe I don't entirely understand that note in the moment, but I'm just going to listen to all the notes, and then that's today me, and then tomorrow me's going to go figure it out. So that's the ideal, right? But then in practice, of course, it's emotionally confronting all the time. And for your, if you're just by yourself and you're getting notes, then you're going to be thinking, oh, well, what are they talking about? Can I fix this? And where did this go wrong? And da-da-da. And so when you have two people who were responsible for the writing, you have two people who are thinking those things, you have two people who are kind of thinking, oh, yeah, that is a flaw, and I thought it was a flaw when we did it, but this other person didn't think it was a flaw. And so, it does bring you closer, because you have to work through all of that and say, okay, now we're going to go back to the drawing board. And then later on, there's interpretation of those notes. Well, I don't know if they really meant that note. And was this the important part, or was this the important part? So it's just another, it's collaboration, right? But it's adding a layer of interpretation and judgment to everything that you do. But it's also, it's kind of comforting in a way, because you have this person who's with you when you're getting these notes, and you know that this person is supporting you, and if you're going someplace kind of emotional, if you feel safe with that person, so it works both ways. Yeah.
Interesting. Were these handwritten notes, typed notes?
Almost all verbal.
All verbal,
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah. So you're sitting there sitting across the table from someone, and they're, kind of, maybe they're referring to notes, but they're giving them to you person to person.
Right. Interesting.
Yeah.
So how many writers were there altogether? Not the actual note givers, but the actual writers being critiqued?
So 12 to 13.
Yeah.
There was one team who was it was a husband-wife team, and she was there part-time because they just had a baby together, so he was there full-time.
And then there was another writing team, Jack and...
Right.
Oh my goodness.
Yeah, so 10 scripts, and Jacques et Jérôme.
Yes, Jerome.
We're a team, and
so
we were
there
a
were,
team.
yeah, so I guess that makes 10...
12.
Like 13, 14, yeah.
So of the writers that were there, let me start again. Of the writers that were there at this castle being critiqued, what did you observe about their temperament and how they worked? What were the similarities that you saw? Like, ooh, I do that too. Isn't that funny? That's kind of this like writer's temperament. And then there's other things that you maybe didn't identify with. But how are you so similar?
Yeah. Well, I thought it's a very interesting group because a few of them have an acting background, and when you come to writing from acting, I think you're coming from a little bit of a different place. So those people, I thought I could feel being, they're a little more extroverted, and they're kind of tend to be, I think they're approaching things a little more emotionally, from character. And then quite a few of them were also filmmakers in their own right. Like a lot of them were working on documentaries, were directors, and so I was really impressed just with the comportment, the confidence that people really seem to have.
That's interesting. How so? Confidence in terms of how they presented their work, like they weren't afraid to show it?
Yeah, I think I'm kind of thinking of Julie, just calm, and they've been around the block a few times. We're working in kind of an independent film arena with this film. So I think here it's very hard because you're really at the bottom of the barrel. People kind of look at it and they're like, oh, the writing's good, but who's going to buy this? Who's going to watch this? Who's going to distribute this? And you get to Europe where a lot of a lot of issue-related films, a lot of documentaries, they're funded by the places that they come from. The state funds you. If you live in Colombia, while we were there, we were kind of putting together our application packet for Sundance Labs, but the other people who were there were putting together their stuff for the government funding from Colombia. So
right.
It's like, I think here you spend, I could be totally wrong. I feel like I'm somebody who's spent a fair amount of time studying, a fair amount of time aspiring, and until somebody really takes something and says, I'm going to pay you for your time, I love what you're doing, we're going to make this, you're still kind of reaching for that. And so you're working with people who are already there. They're like, oh yeah, I've been shooting this documentary for 7 years and I know where the funding is for the post, and we're going to, put it together, and then they're going to show it somewhere. It's kind of like, maybe it's that I'm like, oh, they feel more grown up than me.
Right, okay.
Not that they're working more or even working harder, or even, that we aren't kind of comparable in our knowledge about things. But there was just kind of like a calmness sometimes. And then sometimes it's also like being at summer camp. So by the end of the week, nerves are frayed, everybody's like on their 12th set of notes. They're like, yes, you've told me, 12 other people have told me that this flaw exists, and now you're telling me again. And then people get a little snappy.
Sure, sure. Yeah.
Yes.
Kind of like the real world screenwriting version.
Yes. They're like,
right.
Why are you smoking on the porch? Why are you on the porch if you don't want to be near the smoke? And, like those things, like the real world starts encroaching.